If there's anything I'm asking myself right now, and I'm sure a lot of you are asking yourselves this now too, is when does the follow-through come back? Now, if you're a bear, this is going to be relevant to what you're looking at. And if you're a bull, this is going to be important too. It's important to understand that the current move we see right now, again, finally, I'd say finally is probably now on par with what we saw in June. So please remember, the market's seen this kind of pullback before. Okay. So the scope of previous pullbacks is the measuring stick by which we psychologically decide to feel pretty certain of continuity to the upside, or we completely get rattled and panic. So not something we haven't overcome before. In terms of we, meaning the bulls. Now, when might the bears start to take control? And I think there's some interesting thresholds here. And so the question of when does the follow through come back is going to be, all right, well, when does the bearish follow through? Let's take the bearish argument first. Where does the bearish follow through start to become a more realistic conversation? Well, I think that taking out the lows and taking out 3,300, a major psychological level, is really going to be what takes bullish will, the will to be buying the dip, right? This is probably still considered a dip, and it's probably still somewhere right now where the bulls can feel like they have a justified strategy to consider buying this. I think below 3,300, the bulls lose their will to keep doing that. And the bears become much more empowered. Sellers, right? So 3,300, I think, is a big line in the sand, and specifically the low of 3,295.5. Again, give or take 5 points above, 5 points below a major psychological level is a pretty logical wiggle, pretty normal wiggle. What about the bullish follow through, which has been terrific, really for me since June when we had prices above the 200 period exponential moving average and the kind of indicators that I look at to say, this is the kind of uptrend that has the ability to defy really most, if any, bearishness, longer term bearishness. And so we did that in June. And I probably could have done that in late May. So I was probably a week or two late to making that long only that we've talked about here in these free videos, the long only call. This is the first time since late May, early June that I'm going to reconsider my directional bias. Normally, directional bias is something that I'll look at day to day, or at very least week to week. This is the first time that I'm taking a multi-month directional bias call and considering whether or not that's still valid. And the threshold on the S&P is going to be getting above either the high from Wednesday, or even more specifically, the point of control for the month of September. So that specifically means we need to get above 34.24 or even above 34.35. So 34.24 or 34.35 before I can feel really comfortable about the kind of follow through that we've seen since June. And now this could also mean that come next week, not tomorrow. I want to see how this week wraps up, because let's keep this in mind. This is a 5-day sell-off, if you want to call it that, because today's really an inside day. So this is a 5-day, 4-day sell-off within the context of a multi-month rally. Don't be so twitchy to shift directional bias. Have a little commitment. Be able to sit through a couple of days where the market doesn't necessarily do what you want. I think the very earliest I could have started to be comfortable and say, hey, let's think about the short side. The very earliest would have been this red candle right here, and that would have been the 8th. So that means Tuesday. Tuesday's the earliest that I could have said, hey, you know what? I'd be open to bearish directional bias after multi-months, bullish only. So if I can't take out that threshold, it probably would make sense for me to go into next week with a bearish directional bias. This is huge, gang. So let's see what happens. I want to give you a little insight into this. Hopefully this gives you some things to think about, explains maybe why the follow through hasn't been what you've been experiencing the last few months. This isn't just about, oh, the downtrend's broken. I wish it were that simple. We are shifting out of the uptrend into what would be known as a very early look at perhaps a distribution cycle, but there's more at play, and specifically those are the levels that I pointed out in this video that I'll be watching going into next week. Hope that helps. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see you in the next update.